Holiday in France, 1965. Dad and I prepared for our first family holiday abroad. First we obtained a heavy old trailer, which we renovated with coats of paint, tyres, brake lights and other sundries, from various scrapyards in the area. Next we borrowed some heavy and quite ancient camping equipment from a parishioner, and then improvised missing equipment using ideas from Baden-Powell's scouting books. For example, a toaster made from a metal biscuit tin lid and some chicken wire. Surprisingly, it worked very well. I thoroughly enjoyed our time working together. Grandpa and Grandma moved into St Andrew's Vicarage to look after the parish and to care for Kathleen. The five of us set off through France, travelling in the shade of the poplar trees lining the straight N roads, and singing the Dave Clark 5 song Catch Us If You Can. On our return to England we stayed for a week in Hastings and saw the Beatles movie Help at the local cinema. On our return, I went over to Everton to collect 2 pigeons that Grandpa Bradley had for me. In the meantime, Grandpa Whiteman had drawn up plans for a loft, which we built together and placed in a tree in the vicarage garden. The birds became well known in the locality, especially for the guano that they deposited on the church roof. Later the roof was to be replaced. The architect organised that the bird mess should be retained with a painted copy. Wellingborough Public School, 1965 to 1967. There were the normal variety of teachers. Our PE teacher was an ex-military physical training instructor, as had been the one at Christ's College in Blackheath, both looking as if they had been much more at home in a boxing ring. He was a bully who expected everyone to achieve his high standards. When he left, his replacement, who ran 20 miles every day, simply smiled rather than shouting at our poor attempts. The geography master was an elderly bully. If he did not like your face, he could be merciless. In French classes, most of the time, I was watching out for the missiles of chalk and occasionally board rubbers that frequently came my way because I wasn't quick enough in French conversation. The religious studies master liked everything to be pristine, whereas the mathematics teacher was, on the other hand, quite scruffy. But they had something in common, as I was to discover. I was summoned at different times to their studies. The former's room was immaculate. He began by talking about an essay I'd written, but when he started talking about the nice cabin boys who had looked after him so well on a recent cruise, I knew it was time to leave. The latter's room was dark and scruffy, and the time to go signal came when he bent me over his knee and proceeded to pull down my trousers and slap my bare backside. I resented the fact that cricket matches on Saturdays would go on until completed, which was often quite late in the day, especially so if our captain had elected for our team to bat first. Fortunately, in the 5th year, one understanding teacher started softball for people like me. I also enjoyed the rare opportunities to play tennis or to swim. At the time that I first attended Wellingborough School, the most famous old boy was Andrew Logue Oldham. He had left at 16 with 2 O-levels and found employment with NEMS, publicising the Beatles. Then in London he came across the Rolling Stones and asked Brian Epstein to join him in managing them. Brian replied that his stable of Liverpool artists was enough for him to cope with. So Andrew Oldham went ahead and secured a record contract for the Stones with Decca, who had infamously turned the Beatles down, and who now, in their desperation, offered very good terms to their new signing. However, the royalties were slow in coming, and Oldham, second from the left, decided to take up an offer from Alan Klein to sort things out. And so it was, on one rainy, muddy winter's day, a group of 4th formers stood on the touchline under orders to watch and cheer an old boys' football match against the first 11. It was boring. The game dragged on. The scoreline 0-0. Then a Rolls-Royce with darkened windows drew up next to us. Handbrake on, the chauffeur opened the rear door, from which appeared a scrawny figure wearing sunglasses and football boots. Everything went into slow motion. Oldham walked onto the field, up to the ball, and simply dribbled it into the first 11's goal. Then he stood around for a while and observed the match until the opportunity arose for him to take the ball up to the other end of the pitch and place it in the old boys' goal. This seemed to even things out to a 1-1 scoreline. However, I can't remember whether the referee blew his whistle to acknowledge either goal, but that didn't matter because we just cheered and the sun came out. Then Andrew Oldham left the pitch before the game was over, sauntered back to his car, gave us a wave, and disappeared behind the darkened glass in the back seat of the Rolls, and he was gone. Fantastic. What a hero. I was in Staines House, and our housemaster also commanded the RAF Combined Cadet Force, which we were required to join. The school had its own firing range, where we learnt how to handle both .22 and .303 rifles. The school also had its own glider, which was launched with a huge bungee line stretched by 10 of us on each side of the plane. Our contingent went to a South Coast RAF base for a week. The first thing they did was to put us into an Argos transport plane, which took off and landed about 6 times until we were all feeling thoroughly sick. Back at school we sat exams for our RAF proficiency badge, and I was disappointed to have missed it by only 1 mark. Staines comprised a mixed bunch, with a mixture of nicknames such as Titch, Pixie, Tramp and Slasher. As newcomers, we were called fags, and were at the beck and call of the prefects, who had us cleaning out their rooms. I was picked on a lot. Maybe some of it was me misreading harmless fun that was actually intended to draw me out. Unfortunately, it had the opposite effect, and I just switched off, suppressing all the hurt I felt, and only finding a release for it in the mile walk to the train in the dark, when I could cry in safety. I earned the nickname Hermit, which was depressingly close to the truth. One day a friend of my mother's commented that my room looked just like a hermit's cell. On 2 occasions I was selected to represent Staines House in the annual music competition. The first time I played soprano recorder in a trio with a pianist and a cello player. And the second time I played a duet with Bill Rutherford on soprano and alto melodicas. On December the 7th, 1966, the family welcomed 2 new arrivals, the twins, Andrew and Caroline. Now we were 8. Elizabeth and I enjoyed watching the zany TV programme The Monkees week by week. Elizabeth was a particular fan of Davy Jones, and so Mum told this to her cousin Anne, who lived in California and was married to an engineer on the Monkees set. One day I answered the phone and Davy Jones asked if he could speak to Elizabeth. She was completely tongue-tied, and so Mum took over the conversation. Eventually the summer of '67 arrived, and I was delighted that the Beatles had released their Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album 9 days before my 16th birthday. What a treat! I sat the O-level examinations achieving only 2, in maths and general science. The latter was particularly easy. We were each given an unfortunate insect that had been gassed that morning. As they lay on their backs, one to a desk, we were required to draw what we found there and to name it. Well, I drew it, just like a picture that's gradually produced in a beetle drive. But I wasn't certain what it was until the end of the exam, when the teacher announced, "Bring your woodlice to the front." Everywhere pens were hastily lifted and the word woodlouse inserted into the blank space next to question B. And so ended my association with Wellingborough School.